Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening. My name is Audrey Lichter, the Executive Director of Chai Mitzvah, the Resource Center for Jewish Engagement. Today's Scholars Circle topic is Part 2, Protocols of the Elders of Anti-Zion, the Global Conspiracy Against the Jews, featuring Dr. Andrew Pessin, with our highest number of registrations yet. Chai Mitzvah is a national organization now celebrating its 17th year. We are the sponsor of Scholars Circle and a Jewish resource center that focuses on building community with a special expertise in synagogue growth and engagement with our signature program. We have over 20 curricula tailored for small group conversations for teens and adults, lay or professionally led. For more information, please visit our website at chaimitzvah.org. The Scholars Circle program was inspired by Scott Shea, our founder and board president, who authored the best-selling book Conspiracy U, a Case Study, which unpacks anti-Zionist conspiracy theories from the left and right of the political spectrum. The curriculum was also taught and recorded in a series by Dr. Andrew Pessin, which is available on our website. The Scholars Circle program hosts lectures by prominent scholars every 2 weeks on topics relating to Israel and the Jewish community, geared towards rabbis, educators, and lay leaders who are charged with explaining the complex issues the Jewish community is facing. To that end, each lecture will have a resource guide that will be sent to you after the lecture. A recording of each lecture will be accessible on our website and shared with you through email. Scholars Circle has engaged nearly 4,000 participants since 10/7. We are excited to continue the Scholars Circle program, and we need your support to keep it thriving. We are grateful to the Laboratory for the Study and Prevention of Global Antisemitism at the University of Connecticut for their generous support. For more information about the laboratory, you can contact Professor Dan Wiener, Vice Provost for Global Affairs and Professor of Geography, or Professor Jessica Cooperman, Head of UConn Center for Judaic Studies and Contemporary Jewish Life. Your donation to Scholars Circle will enable us to continue bringing international scholars to you at no charge to share their expertise on the evolving Jewish world in the aftermath of October 7th. To make a donation, please visit chaimitzvah.org, click on the gold menu tab, Scholars Circle, and select Support Scholars Circle. This will be included in your follow-up email as well. Thank you for considering supporting this engaging program for all. The program's recording will be sent to you by email in a few days and would also be available on our website at chaimitzvah.org. Dr. Andrew Pessin is Professor of Philosophy at Connecticut College and founding director of the Institute for the Critical Study of Antizionism. His many books include Anti-Zionism on Campus, Poisoning the Wells, Anti-Semitism in Contemporary America, and the Jewish God Question, as well as several novels. One recent novel is Bright College Years, published in 2024 by Open Books. Long ago, he enjoyed some moments of fame portraying the genius on The David Letterman Show. We welcome audience questions anytime. Please use the Zoom Q&A box. Dr. Pessin, welcome to Scholars Circle.
Thank you, Audrey, and also thank you, Simon, behind the scenes, and especially thank you to Chai Mitzvah Scholars Circle for being so generous in supporting the new initiative I'll be talking about towards the end of the talk, the Institute for the Critical Study of Antizionism. They will be helping me to launch this with a lecture series coming up in the near future, and I will get to that at the end of the talk. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's wonderful to hear good number of people pre-registered. So let's get to it. Let's see. Continue to share. That looks good. Okay. You see that okay, Audrey? It's there? All right. Wonderful. Here's my basic contact information. Follow me, please, on X or a Substack. If you're interested in the new initiatives I'll be talking about, following me at these places will be the best way to stay informed. And if you're interested, I recently published this 2-volume work collecting my writings of the last 10 years, really focusing on the trajectory of the campus situation to the point where it produced the horrific responses to the October 7th massacre, where so many major campuses responded by celebrating and endorsing rather than with horrific horror and condemnation. So those are in those books right there. All right, so this is part 2 of a talk that I began. Part 1 was back in August, but don't worry, I'm going to do a quick recap of part 1. So if you missed part 1, you'll be fine. Part 1 is available on the Scholar Circle website, I believe. So, in a course I taught this past spring called American Zionism and Anti-Zionism, I had a very talented student who asked me towards the end of the semester, quite incredulously, the following. She said this. But nearly everyone in the world agrees that Israel is guilty of so many terrible things. So many countries, so many UN reports, so many international courts, so many NGOs, so many experts, so many professors. What are the chances that you, meaning me, who deny these crimes are right and everybody else is wrong? And the whole world be wrong? It's a powerful question, and in a way, this is the hardest argument for a Zionist to respond to because indeed she's right. So many countries, so many UN reports, etc. So this is a tough question. It puts you in this position. I have this cartoon up on my office door for obvious reasons. You're the person who has to look at the mob of people and say, yes, you are all wrong.
Mhm.
One might be reminded here of Netanyahu's speech at the UN a couple of months back. Before the UN General Assembly when almost everyone walked out on him. Here, the mob is showing its disagreement by simply vacating the premises, but the idea, of course, is the same. It's the one person against the world. Pretty clearly, it takes incredible courage to be that person standing up against the mob, or perhaps incredible foolishness or chutzpah to imagine that you are smarter than everyone else or that you have the truth when everyone else disagrees. Kind of like this guy. He's one of my favorite guys in all history. You see this sea of people giving the Hitler salute, and there's one guy in the crowd there with his arms crossed. So I have this up on my office door as well to remind me to be that guy. Uh, so let me begin by noting that this situation is not at all unfamiliar to Jews who have a long history of being a very tiny minority, standing at odds with the beliefs and practices of the whole world around them. Perhaps that is even the quintessential Jewish condition. And indeed, one famous Jewish thinker has already posed and grappled with the question phrased exactly that way. Ahad Ha'am wrote a very famous essay in 1892 where he says, but you ask, is it possible that everybody can be wrong and the Jews right? He, of course, in this essay is talking about the famous blood libel, which lots of people believed was true of the Jews, that they used the blood of Christian children for their rituals and so forth. But of course, we Jews know that that's false, even if the whole world happens to believe otherwise. Nevertheless, the question persists to this day, of course, as per my student's question there, to the point where a very important scholar named Richard Landis wrote really an entire book about the phenomenon. Can the whole world be wrong? I recommend this book heartily. He will be speaking in the lecture series that I will be talking about at the end. So I will be in this lecture tonight joining in the fine tradition of Ahad Ha'am and Richard Landis and beginning to explain precisely why indeed the whole world is wrong. And I, along with that frighteningly small number of Zionists in the world comparative to the global population, we are right. Today's presentation is adapted from a fairly long article I wrote, published on my Substack back in May called Protocols of the Elders of Anti-Zion. So that's where the title comes from. I was privileged to give a Scholar Circle lecture presenting some of it back in August, as I mentioned. That was part one. Tonight, I'll briefly review that material and then I'll advance it with a close look at some of the methods that anti-Zionists typically use to construct their propaganda against the Jews. And then I will close by announcing several new initiatives, including the Institute for the Critical Study of Antizionism. So strap on your seatbelts and let's go. I presume most people in this audience will be aware of the most influential anti-Semitic book in modern history, The Protocols of the Elders of Zion, appearing in the early 1900s and then adopted and disseminated by truly the A-team of international anti-Semites, Russia and the Soviet Union, the Nazis, the Muslim Brotherhood, and Hamas, and so on. This famous forgery purports to be the minutes to a secret meeting that the elders of Zion had behind the scenes of the first Zionist Congress back in 1897. Of course, there are no such elders, and there was no such meeting, but those facts, although widely known from at least 1921 onward, didn't stop the book from essentially spreading around the world and directly inspiring Hitler's final solution, Hamas's jihadist final solution, and the long ongoing campaign of Russian Soviet anti-Zionism. And what is it about this book that inspires such terrible behavior? It's that the book alleges to reveal the secret plot, the conspiracy the Jews have to subjugate the world and control or even destroy all of the peoples. And it explains in detail exactly how the Jews plan to do that by taking control of the banks and the media and of governments and of starting wars and so forth. And when faced with the prospect of this dastardly evil doing, who wouldn't respond by trying to annihilate that threat? Of course, it's all delusional nonsense, which is why all rational, clear-headed, decent people recognize in the protocols not the documentation of a conspiracy, but a conspiracy theory, one that is deliberately designed to justify and incentivize hate and violence towards the Jews. The irony, of course, is that all the attention rightly paid to the protocols, which is believed by tens of millions of people to this day to be factual, obscures the increasingly apparent fact that there actually does exist a global conspiracy, although in precisely the opposite direction. Sometimes working together, sometimes working in parallel, sometimes centrally directed, sometimes dispersed, sometimes secretly, sometimes very much out in the open. Collectively, there is an enormous body of individuals, organizations, and governments who have all been working towards the same inglorious end for well over a century now. It's not that the dastardly Jews are trying to control and subjugate the world. It's that the peoples of the world, or at least enormously large constituents thereof, are actively conspiring to subjugate, and in all too many cases, to outright eliminate the Jews. Roughly speaking, the whole world. The point of the lecture in August was to lay out some of the major players in this conspiracy against the Jews. So we'll go quickly through them tonight before moving on to examining their protocols. So, although the underlying Jew hatred goes back millennia, ground zero for the modern conspiracy anti-Semitism is pre-Soviet Russia itself, whose rampant, pervasive, and often violent anti-Semitism produced the original conspiracy theory protocols in the first place, and in so doing, launched the actual conspiracy against the Jews. We might call the mysterious, unknown forgers of the protocols the original elders of anti-Zion. And suffice to say that 19th century Russian anti-Semitism, producing waves of murderous pogroms from 1880s onwards, including the notorious Kishinev pogrom in 1903, I believe, that's what ultimately produced Zionism. The degree to which the protocols then influenced Hitler and the Nazis is well known. We spent some time on that back in August. In brief, in the Nazi worldview and Hitler's worldview, the Jews were out to conquer and destroy the world, including Germany, and so it was necessary to destroy the Jews. Hence, the final solution. There's literally a straight line from the protocols to the Holocaust. And nor may we overlook the central role played in this conspiracy by the professors, the scholars, the intellectuals, the ones who are producing the ideas and arguments that motivate the leaders and then become propaganda to mobilize the masses. This was scholarship that was intentionally weaponized to advance the political program of the Nazis. That's a way of saying that basically Nazi scholarship was directly and deliberately involved in advancing the conspiracy against the Jews. Nothing and nobody better documents this than Max Weinreich's famous 1946 book, pictured here, Hitler's Professors. As Hannah Arendt wrote in her review of the book, Dr. Weinreich is right to insist that Hitler showed one of his crucial insights into the nature of modern propaganda when he asked for scientific arguments and refused to use the standard crackpot ones of traditional anti-Semitic propaganda. End quote. The scare quotes around the word scientific, of course, are key. It's easy for decent people, people who consider themselves decent, to reject obvious, crude, raw bigotry and hatred, but dress it up as science and it goes down far more easily, as we will see in the year 2025. So what we have here are the professors providing the intellectual ammunition in the conspiracy against the Jews. And for those who've been watching the campus scene, if you thought you couldn't possibly hate the academy and universities anymore, just wait, right? It's the professors. So let's consider the professors the next new cohort to enter the elders of anti-Zion. As far as the link from anti-Semitism to anti-Zionism, it's actually straightforward and clear in these early days. Um, Uh, Obviously, there's a lot of discussion about the relationship between anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, and lots of people today try to distinguish them, and maybe they are distinct. We'll come back to that point a little bit later. However, what is unambiguously clear is that anti-Zionism flows directly from anti-Semitism, and it certainly does so in the Nazi case and in the Soviet case and in some of the other players as well. So we have this quote from Mein Kampf, Hitler's famous tome, and the key part here is the Jews. He's talking about the Jews trying to form their national state, a Palestinian state. He says it doesn't even enter their heads to build up the Jewish state in Palestine for the purpose of living there. All they want is a central organization for their international world swindle, endowed with its sovereign right, a haven for convicted scoundrels, and a university for budding crooks. So think carefully about the logic that's displayed here. This is a classic anti-Semite. Hitler, he hates the Jews. He thinks the Jews are engaged in a conspiracy to control the world. What's he going to think of the Jewish national state? It is simply going to be the instrument through which or by which the dastardly Jews will advance their agenda to control the world. The anti-Semitism instantly and directly produces the anti-Zionism. Once you've seen that here, you will see it in almost every case. Even 2025, when people say, I'm an anti-Zionist, I'm not an anti-Semite, you will find that their anti-Zionism is ultimately rooted in the anti-Semitism. So those were the Nazis. We can quickly add, and we'll come back in a moment, to the Arab and Muslim worlds in general. Uh, Not only did numerous Nazi officials end up in Arab countries after the war, where they carried out the Nazi program, but now with the support of Arab governments, but the Nazis disseminated Arabic translations of the protocols across the Arab Muslim regions. Think about that. The Protocols of the Elders of Zion produced the Holocaust. The Nazis take it with them to the Arab Muslim worlds and disseminate it into the Arab Muslim worlds. Doing this was, in fact, one of the tasks of this famous guy. This is the Palestinian national and religious leader from the 1920s into the 1950s, the Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini, who spent the war years in Berlin collaborating with the Nazis. These are some famous photographs of him chatting it up with Hitler on top and with Himmler. This photo was taken at a concentration camp that he was visiting, I'm sure with much favor. And the photo on the bottom is him saluting a Muslim regiment that he had assembled to participate in the Nazi military effort. Though we cannot overlook the long independent history of Islamic anti-Semitism, neither can we overlook the explosive fuel that was added to that pre-existing anti-Semitism when Nazi ideology was poured onto it, especially through these translations of the protocols and through the propaganda that the Mufti was disseminating to the Arab world. So from this point onward, much of the Arab and Muslim world is officially part of the now truly global conspiracy against the Jews launched by the protocols. Happily, the Nazis did not endure, although they did bequeath far too many followers even to this day. But next taking the reins, or perhaps taking them back, are the Soviets, who, although bitter enemies of the Nazis, shared the relevant ideology that they themselves had launched some decades earlier through the protocols, and then went on to share it around the globe. Here, the work of Isabella Tabarovsky is essential. Let me note two things. First, she will also be speaking in the lecture series that I'll talk about at the end. And second, she has a brand new book just out a week or two ago called Be a Refusenik. I haven't read it yet. It's on my list, but everyone should check it out. It's getting fantastic reviews, and it's an essential book where she is using her experience as a former resident of the Soviet Union, as a Jewish resident of the Soviet Union, to shed light on the contemporary Western scene for Jews. So everybody should check out this book. To summarize her work way too quickly over her work over the past few years, basically she has documented the gargantuan, ceaseless effort of the Soviet Union to attack the Jews by delegitimizing the newly born state of Israel. Unless you think that's merely anti-Zionism and not anti-Semitism, the effort itself, she explains quite clearly, was rooted in the protocols, and some of the original Soviet propagandists were straightforward admirers of Hitler and Nazism. With the Soviets begins the truly organized campaign, a veritable industry, a conspiracy, which in time produces, as the quote here says, hundreds of anti-Zionist and anti-Israel books and thousands of articles published in the Soviet Union, with millions of copies entering circulation in the country. But the campaign isn't restricted merely to the already vast in itself Soviet Union. Many of these materials were translated into many foreign languages, English, French, German, Spanish, Arabic, of course, and were disseminated all over the globe through the Soviet Union's powerful state-owned media apparatus, whose goal was to, quote, spread the truth about the Soviet Union in all the continents. As for the translations into Arabic in particular, like the Nazis, but on a much larger scale, the Soviet Union, allied with the Arab world for many decades, widely propagated its conspiracy all over the Arab world itself. But here we have even more than just the translation and dissemination of these virulently anti-Semitic and therefore anti-Zionist tracts. We'll also mention last time, coming back to the Palestinians for a moment, there is some evidence that the Soviets literally created the Palestine Liberation Organization, the PLO, and handpicked and trained Yasser Arafat to run it. And so it's quite possible that the Soviet Union is really the motivating force behind the Palestinian national movement. Some of that information was revealed by a very high-ranking defector who came and wrote a book, Pachipa. We won't talk about him here. All I want to mention is, oops, I'll go back there. He talks about the Soviet Union disseminating the protocols of the Elders of Zion into the Islamic world, as you see in this quote. By 1978, the whole Soviet bloc intelligence community had sent some 4,000 agents of influence into the Islamic world. In the mid-1970s, we started showering the Islamic world with an Arabic translation of the protocols of the Elders of Zion. So once again, it's pre-existing long history of Islamic anti-Semitism, but now you essentially have this protocols Nazi Soviet anti-Semitism, the modern conspiracy theory version of anti-Semitism, poured onto that context there. Unless you think that that's all in the past somehow, consider current PA and PLO President Mahmoud Abbas, currently serving, I believe, the 21st or 22nd year of his 4-year term. It turns out he was one of these Soviet Zionologists. He got a PhD from one of these institutions in the Soviet Union. He wrote his PhD. It was a Holocaust denying PhD, which also, interestingly, tried to claim the Zionists were working in cahoots with the Nazis at the same time as he's denying the Holocaust. Don't expect logic. But the point was, he is one of Brezhnev's professors. He trained in a Soviet institute. He wrote a Soviet anti-Zionist and anti-Semitic dissertation. So it's not a past event. He's very much current, obviously. So just as Hitler's professors had produced this anti-Semitic science and then disseminated it wherever they conquered, including the Arab and Muslim world, their affiliates. So to the Soviet scientists, we'll call them Brezhnev's professors, did exactly the same thing. A couple of points to make about that. Number one, you cannot overemphasize that this campaign was systematic, systemic, top-down, government-directed, carefully and intentionally designed, crafted, and pursued. This fits all the hallmarks of a true conspiracy. The second, another key point, again, is to emphasize the role of propaganda. Again, the scientists, the professors. Again, I will emphasize the professors in advancing this conspiracy. The material that they produced was then translated, as I mentioned earlier, into other languages and distributed abroad by, for example, the Novosti press agency, which was an important arm of Soviet propaganda. And it was through this mechanism that some of the fundamental lies/libels were formulated and disseminated. It's the Soviet Union that is primarily the source of the idea that the Jews are perpetrating genocide and that the Jews are racist, which produces the apartheid claim that the Jews are aggressive and they're always land grabbing and all that stuff. So if those sound familiar, especially the first couple, the genocide, racism, and apartheid, you hear those, of course, today on college campuses. They come literally right out of the Soviet campaign. And this indeed is essentially the Soviet playbook. Create this pseudoscience, translate it and disseminate it around the world, and you turn the world against the Jews. This is their playbook. These are their protocols. And indeed, they borrowed many of these techniques from the protocols themselves. To these, we of course will quickly add the Western progressives, the ones who you primarily see on the Western campus. And what Tabarovsky documents very thoroughly and beautifully is the degree to which Western progressives are directly rooted in the Soviet campaign. The Soviet Union was the main beacon of light and inspiration for the Western left. She documents all the conferences that the Soviet Union would hold and the leading Western leftists would come. And then there's a straight line you can draw from Soviet Union sponsored leftism with all of these libels to today's Western progressives. The form, of course, it takes in today's campus is critical race theory, DEI, post-colonial studies. There's a whole stew, a whole mix of ideologies. The point I want to make simply tonight is this. Um, this group, the Western progressives, they will, on the surface, disavow the protocols of the elders of Zion. That book, they say, is like, a right-wing anti-Semitic text, and we're not anti-Semites, so they disavow it. And yet, what they've managed to create when you study the progressive worldview is a directly equivalent conspiracy theory about the Jews. Way oversimplified in one or two sentences, according to Western progressivism, Jews are essentially white supremacist oppressors of marginalized people. They then apply that to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and they see the Israelis as white, supremacist, colonizing oppressors of indigenous, marginalized people of color, the Palestinians, right? And if you step back from that idea for a moment, what you'll realize is their view of the world is that the Jews are working together to subjugate and control the rest of the world. It's exactly the same conspiracy theory as the protocols of the elders of Zion, but expressed in leftist language, progressive language. And so at the same time as they disavow the protocols, they are essentially disseminating an equivalent theory, all of which can be traced back to the Soviet Zionology. I do want to thank and credit Scott Shea here, the book that Audrey mentioned at the beginning. This was the book that really got me thinking along these lines. He showed very clearly that progressivism was as much a conspiracy theory against the Jews as the traditional right-wing anti-Semites. This is really an important book. He is the founder of Chai Mitzvah. So thank you to Scott and thank you to Chai Mitzvah. By the way, everybody should make a donation to Chai Mitzvah Scholar Circle. They've been doing amazing work for the last couple of years, bringing scholars to the public, and I'm sure they would appreciate your support. All right, so let's now turn to some of the methods and techniques that anti-Zionist scholars and scientists use. Number one, idea laundering. This practice seems to me alarmingly prevalent in the left-dominated world of the humanities and social sciences and campuses in general, and what we might call the NGO UN circular echo chamber, most of which is very ill-disposed towards the Jews and their national endeavor. Peter Boghossian, citing Brett Weinstein, I think is generating the term idea laundering for this technique. He wrote a Wall Street Journal opinion piece some years back talking about idea laundering. And also, my favorite pro-Israel blogger is the Elder of Zion. I commend him to you. You should check him out. He does the work of battalions of scholars just on his own. He's also written about idea laundering, as we see in this piece here. He calls his Twitter rant on the social sciences. As Elder, and of course, tongue in cheek, notice he spells it with a Y to distinguish himself from an actual Elder of Zion, because we're agreed they don't exist. As Elder sums it up, he puts it this way. Idea laundering is the process by which academia pretty much makes things up while pretending that they're following some sort of scientific method. One person will make up a theory, but unlike scientific theories, it requires no proof or corroboration. It just needs to appeal to the target audience, namely other people in the social sciences. Then that paper will become one of the sources for many other papers that take that unproven theory as a fact and extend it into la la land, as he puts it. The cycle repeats. People need to realize social science isn't science. Citations aren't proof. And I think that captures it pretty well. Someone writes a paper, he says something absolutely ridiculous. He has a new concept or a new crime he can accuse Israel of, and then someone else cites that paper, and then the third person cites both these papers, and with a little while, you have a body of work, and they don't no longer need to prove, for example, we'll come to this in just a moment, that settler colonialism applies to Israel. They just need to say Israel is a settler colonial enterprise, and then they'll put as their citations 20 papers which say the same thing, as if they're offering evidence. But there's no evidence. Citations are just what other people said, right? And so the fact that someone else said it doesn't make it true. Or to put that a little differently, garbage in, garbage out. You can cite that other paper, but if what that person said is baloney, then it doesn't become true just because you're citing it. And once you see this technique, once you're aware of it, you will start seeing it all over the place. Elder does indeed apply this specifically to settler colonialism, how someone essentially makes up the concept, and within a few years, it's a whole recognized field of study where opinion is presented as fact and papers are treated as legitimate, no matter how sloppy they are, as long as they are citing earlier papers which said the same thing. It's really quite a house of cards. And then he gets, as he says towards the end, the more adventurous academics try to extend this house of cards into new areas. If Zionism is racism, maybe it's sexism too. Can I define Israeli apartheid as a form of genocide? And if you're familiar with anti-Zionist scholarship, it is exactly like this. They're always moving from target to target, coining a new concept, inventing a new crime, and before you know it, it's treated as if it's an established fact. But it's not just academia. If it were only academia, well, academia is bad enough, but it's not just academia. We turn to, I mentioned the UN a few minutes ago. So, for another timely example, consider the case of Francesca Albanese, the current and eighth United Nations Special Rapporteur on Palestine. First, if the UN appointing a permanent inquisitor who is charged with endlessly finding crimes of which to accuse Israel is not part of a global conspiracy against the Jews, it's hard to imagine what would be. But more to the point, let's examine how idea laundering has worked with respect to the allegation specifically of genocide, relying here on Norman Goda's essential recent paper called The Genocide Libel. Professor Goda just spoke 2 weeks ago in the Scholar Circle. I commend that lecture to you as well. He talked about this paper. So pay attention to this and weep. In July of 2024, Francesca Albanese claimed on Twitter that the Israelis had killed not 37,000 people in Gaza, which was the already inflated official number, but rather 186,000. That figure came from phantom arithmetic in a letter published in the British medical journal The Lancet, which claimed to predict the discovery of additional deaths, like under the rubble, at a 4-to-1 ratio. Albanese's post was seen over 600,000 times. The 186,000 number was soon trumpeted by all sorts of media. An interpress service, which covers the UN, called it a staggering estimate, which resurrected accusations of genocide as it had come from, quote, one of the most prestigious peer-reviewed British medical journals. So there's the claim, and within a few news cycles, it's being repeated everywhere and being sourced to this prestigious medical journal. What's the problem? Never mind that the original letter was actually immediately denounced as non-credible by many with actual expertise in the model, in the matter. Never mind that the allegation actually appeared in a non-peer-reviewed letter to the editor to the journal. That didn't stop others from sourcing it to the prestigious peer-reviewed journal. Nor has the fact that in the extended ceasefires since, the number of people discovered in the rubble turned out to be absolutely nowhere near any of these predictions. There was never any retraction. So that number was literally made up, 186,000, made up, invented, dressed up in pseudoscientific reasoning, science, and then echoed around the world to the point where by December 2024, just 5 months after she disseminated this, anti-Israel NGO Amnesty International published a 300-page report subtitled Israel's Genocide in Gaza, citing that number. Just think about that. You make up a number, and a few weeks later, NGOs are citing that number as if it's a fact, and you can be sure that the United Nations and international legal bodies will not be far behind. So, idea laundering takes made up stuff, absolute nonsense, and turns it into science. And once it becomes science, it starts moving up the food chain. It will move up into the NGOs, and then it will move up into the United Nations. It will start featuring in all sorts of UN reports, and then it will find its way into the international courts, the ICC and the ICJ, etc. And it's all absolute nonsense. And all of it is literally following the Soviet playbook. Campaigns such as these may not be centrally directed the way Soviet campaigns were, but the effect is the same. We have an entire international network of scholars de facto working together, a global conspiracy to delegitimize the Jews and their national endeavor. Big lies, libels, and genocide. There's a lot to say here, but the big lies comes, of course, from Nazi propaganda. Goebbels has a famous quote where he said, the secret is you tell a lie so enormous that people just assume it must be true because you'd never be so brazen as to tell such an enormous lie. So you tell these big lies and you repeat them over and over again, and pretty soon everyone just believes them to be true. This is a crucial technique. And we all know the many important libels, genocide, apartheid, ethnic cleansing, all that sort of stuff. Elsewhere, I have spent time refuting the libels, and I was privileged to do a couple of Scholar Circle lectures refuting some of these libels. It's important to be able to do that, but it's also important to recognize that these are libels. These are libels, and I refer back to Professor Goda's paper again, the genocide libel. You must read this paper. You must see that talk that he gave a couple weeks ago for Scholar Circle, and you'll realize how genocide, the concept, has been weaponized against the Jews in Israel since the concept itself was invented in 1944. Roughly speaking, anything the Jews do counts as genocide, including defending themselves from genocide. Once you see how these libels work, you cannot unsee it. Moving ahead, since we're starting to run short on time, more lies, double standards, weaponized omissions. I want to just talk about the latter. Weaponized omissions. The most fundamental way to promulgate the evil of the Jews and their national enterprise is simply to erase all context from their actions. For example, completely omit the various Arab actions to which Jewish actions are typically a response. Imagine you were describing a war, but you completely left out of your description one of the armies, especially the army that started the war. You would instead have a description of the other army just going into places and shooting things up and blowing them up. They would look like aggressors. They would look like they were villains. They would look like they were perpetrating genocide. So by leaving out those actions, you paint a completely false picture of the Jewish actions. So here's a one-sided army, the best I could come up with. The the worst violator of this, you find this a lot in anti-Zionist literature, anti-Zionist scholarship. They constantly accuse the Jews of things and just leave out what the Arabs have done, what the Palestinians have done. This book is a prime example of that. I just want to say two things about this book. It describes basically the 1948 war, but entirely leaves out anything that the Arab armies and the Palestinians did. So it makes it look like the Israelis are just swooping in and expelling people. Elon Pape is an incredibly dishonest scholar, in my personal opinion. But you should know that this book, which was published in 2006, 20 years later, as of last week anyway, it was ranked 34,000 on Amazon bestsellers. That's out of at least 10 million books that are ranked, meaning the top 1%, meaning people get rich from this shit. This guy has gotten rich from this book, and that's important always to keep in mind. So the shocking conclusions are these, that there's really no difference between today's anti-Zionism and ultimately Nazi and Soviet anti-Zionism, which was produced by scholars in scare quotes, deliberately creating propaganda in order to delegitimize the Jewish people and the Jewish national endeavor. And all of it is ultimately fueled by the protocols. You paint the Jews as evil aggressors, and then you justify all the violent measures you take back. And it's not the Jews who are in a conspiracy to control the world. It is the world or large parts thereof that are working in a systematic and ultimately organized, coordinated fashion to destroy the Jews. Since we are short in time and I want to leave time for questions, I will mention The Forces of Darkness, the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism. This is literally just like a Soviet Zionology Institute. This was formed a couple of years ago, the week actually of the October 7th massacre. It's a bunch of professors who are producing scientific scholarship outlining all the evils of Zionism, exactly following the playbook and the protocols of the Soviet Union. So if we had Hitler's professors and Brezhnev's professors, we now have, in my opinion, Hamas's professors. They are doing exactly the same work. Um, and we won't talk much about them. So the shocking conclusion, again, is that the campus scene Western progressivism is just following the playbook of the Nazis and the Soviets, and ultimately the Arab Islamist scholars. We didn't get a chance to talk about them in their campaign against the Jews, Hamas's professors, indeed. So, to the question, can the whole world be right and the Jews be right? Well, the answer to that is yes, if the whole world is in fact engaged in a global conspiracy against the Jews. We've sketched a little bit of that here, gone through some of their protocols here. And so that brings us to the all important question, namely, what is to be done? And perhaps a couple of you will chuckle at the fact that I chose Vladimir Lenin's book, What is to be Done, to illustrate that a moment. But that is, of course, the burning question of our time. What is to be done? So I would like to announce several new initiatives that all formed within the last few months. There is the Movement Against Anti-Zionism, which is a nonpartisan emergency response initiative confronting the rapidly escalating anti-Zionist hate movement that's actively endangering Jewish communities worldwide. And we are talking just a couple of days after the Australian episode and other episodes as well. Through education, advocacy, coalition building, Maz addresses the spread of harmful narratives, including the libels that undermine civil discourse and public safety. Their mission, critically examine and expose the structural dynamics of anti-Zionism. Their founder is Adam Lewis Klein. He will be speaking in the series I'm about to mention. Please do check out this movement, get involved. I think they're doing really terrific work. And also just recently formed is Stop Anti-Zionism, which is it bills itself as an education and advocacy initiative grounded in the clear moral claim that anti-Zionism is today's Jew hatred and must be exposed as such. They treat anti-Zionism as not only a threat to Jews in Israel, it's a corrosive ideology that endangers the free democratic world. Stop Anti-Zionism issued the first global declaration on anti-Zionism. I have it there. There's a link there. You can hopefully write that down or you'll find it. This has been signed by over 8,000 individuals and over a dozen organizations. They aim to expose the dangers of the Red-Green Alliance and state with clarity that the Jewish community is no longer confused. Anti-Zionism is Jew hatred. Their founder, Naya Lecht, will also be speaking in the lecture series. So please check out both of these and see what they're doing. They're really doing important, good work. And then lastly, my initiative. I am launching, and tonight I'm officially announcing the launch of the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism. The previous two movements are primarily activist groups. This is a scholarly enterprise. It will eventually be a scholarly endeavor aiming to get it housed in a proper university and start producing the scholarship that will balance that produced by the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism for one thing, and just in general to rebalance the playing field because the academy has been taken over by this corrosive ideology, and it is time to reclaim the academy one campus at a time. So this will be launching initially. There's a bunch of projects already underway. It is launching officially with a lecture series, which will lay out the foundations of what's called the anti-Zionist complex. It will lay out the basic history, the basic issues. This lecture series will explore anti-Zionism as an ideology, as a worldview, and as a movement. And before we can fight it, we have to understand it. And that's what this lecture is about tonight, beginning that. The series of lectures that is coming, it's all about that. I've got some absolutely fantastic people who will be giving those lectures. I want to thank Chai Mitzvah Scholar Circle for they will be presenting. They are sponsoring this inaugural series of lectures. Please mark your calendars. And please follow me and follow the Institute. I will be revealing the names of the people. I've been dropping hints along the way if you're paying attention, but I will be revealing the names and titles of these lectures in the few weeks ahead. So please follow the Institute and follow me in order to stay informed. But meanwhile, mark your calendars. It's a very exciting series. We are conceiving of them really as a basic course introduction to the critical study of anti-Zionism, as I said, laying out the foundations. I am absolutely thrilled and overwhelmed at the positive response I am getting from scholars, from students, from community members, from potential funders, from universities. Right. So I am in talks with a couple of universities. If you think your university might be a good home for the Institute for the Critical Study of Anti-Zionism, please reach out to me. If you are aware of a significant source of money that could help fund this endeavor, please reach out to me. I would love to have that conversation. Or if you're just interested in being involved in any capacity, minimal to maximal, please reach out to me. So to stay abreast, be informed, collaborate or participate, follow ICSA these ways. Here's the Twitter handle. We're on Instagram, and the Substack is officially launching sometime in the next few days. So check them out, follow, and join the wave. And we'll
Mhm.
start off small, but soon we'll be this. And
Mhm.
the goal, of course, is to be at least this. This was my effort at an AI generated. I said a lot of surfers on a big wave, so looks like they did that. So thank you very much for listening. I hope you will get involved. Thank you again to Chai Mitzvah Scholar Circle for the opportunity, and I am happy to turn to questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Pessin. Lots of questions. Lots of questions.
Good.
Lots of thank yous as well.
You're
Okay.
welcome.
Um, it's exciting to know what you have in store for us, and we'll be by your side, really. Mark Twain, anonymous attendee says, Mark Twain said,
I thought you had Mark Twain on the line there for a second.
a lie will travel around the world before truth has a chance to put on its shoe. So,
Famous line. Yeah.
yeah.
And
Um,
and absolutely apropos, because that's how they operate. That's the playbook. Tell the big lie, repeat it a lot of times, disseminate it throughout all of your networks. And then on page 43, there's a little correction that says, oh, it's not true. But,
right.
yeah.
So we are definitely seeing the results of globalize the Intifada, what that means. This is really critical. So
May I comment just on, I don't know if that was you or that was a questioner,
I
but just,
know.
words are important, words, lies matter. And these lies in particular, because from the protocols onward, the whole point and purpose of these lies, the conspiracy theory lies going back to the protocols, is to mark the Jews for marginalization, exclusion, violence, elimination. And we're seeing that absolutely globalize into the Intifada, along with particularly the genocide libel of the last couple of years, right? If Israel is committing genocide and most Jews support Israel, then most Jews are genocide supporters, and then you're justified in murdering them, which is literally what we're seeing. So these libels are enormous. And by the way, these libels all fundamentally began with the professors, right? They began in these think tanks and so forth who create this material. So again, if you thought you couldn't hate the university anymore, well, it's the professors who are doing a lot of this. And that's why my institute needs to be in a university, right? It can't be off the campus. It has to be on campus because we have to be able to say, stop, this is not scholarship, right? Stop the idea laundering. We need to be able to confront the scholarship as it's being produced and not doing, as the first, person, as the Mark Twain quote indicated, we're always playing catch up. We're like 20 years behind them on this long game strategy that they're playing. We need to be right in their face, stopping them as they produce the bullshit scholarship.
Mm,
All right, to the questions.
right. Renat Shimishi says, my own congressman, Ro Kahana, sponsored a resolution to recognize the Gaza genocide. I confronted him on that at a local town hall, listing all the evidence showing that this is a blood libel. Predictably, he said, it's not his determination, but the UN's, and he has to listen to the quote experts. So frustrating. So, yeah, how do we confront the experts? I mean,
Can
this
the whole world be wrong, right? That's
and the whole
exactly
world be
this.
wrong. And to that point, I would like to say there was a comment that the whole world can be wrong when everybody's listening to the same news station. So if you've got this silo of news coming into your feed, uh, you
Uh,
know,
uh,
that's
yeah,
a problem.
interesting. Right. So let me mention again the movement against anti-Zionism and stop anti-Zionism. They are activist groups. I don't know if they've set up the hotline yet, but their plan is to set up, maybe on their website, right? If an incident is occurring around you, and or there's a bunch of incidents. There's actually a food co-op that's dealing with, a BDS resolution that's been ongoing for a while. There's an academic union that's turning anti-Israel. It's totally inappropriate. We've already had people reaching out saying, "I don't help me. How do I handle this? What do I do or say?" So please think of movement against anti-Zionism and stop anti-Zionism. They should be your first stops because they are people who are they want to be trained. They are training people to handle each individual incident. How do you respond to a person who says, well, the UN says it's genocide, right? And there's a whole bunch of ways you can respond, but most people won't know that. So go to those movements in particular. And, my scholarly institute will not be an activist thing, but you're always free to reach out to me. I often won't know how to help you, but I'll know who can help you. So as incidents happen in your world, please do reach out. This is part of what these groups, where all of us are trying to be a resource to mobilize and equip and empower the Jewish community to finally push back against the world's conspiracy against us.
Um, so there's a question about supporting the scholarship and how is the scholarship in the United States being supported and why is it tolerated?
You mean the evil scholarship, I
Mhm.
suppose.
Mhm.
That's a fine question. That's a fine question. I mean, there are people who are trying to do research to track the funds. We know the wonderful people at ISCAP, which is the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy. They've been, on the leading edge of documenting the Arab and Qatari money that's been coming into a bunch of major universities and trying to show the influence of that money that, some of that money establishes a Center for Middle Eastern Studies where they only hire anti-Zionists. And if you read the recent report last week, the Columbia University Anti-Semitism Task Force released their fourth and final report. And amongst their recommendations, well, amongst their observations was that the Middle East Studies Department at Columbia was staffed entirely by anti-Zionists. There wasn't a Zionist voice amongst the Middle East scholars of that university. And without question, Columbia's gotten a lot of money from Arab countries who establish these centers and then pick the scholars who occupy them. So we know that's part of it. The particular Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism, which is sort of the immediate trigger of my own institute, they clearly have significant resources. They have a very professional operation, very nice looking website. They are producing podcasts and they're producing curricula for both for college and for K through 12. They're producing a journal. They've had multiple conferences. I don't know where that money comes from. I know in my own institution, Connecticut College, there are some professors there who have been running an anti-Israel lecture series since a few weeks after October 7th. They responded basically to the October 7th massacre by bringing in, now over the last 2 years, 15, because 14 was not enough, apparently, 15 anti-Israel people starting just a few weeks after October 7th, basically to explain why Israel deserved it. I mean, that's the only way to understand this, these anti-Israel lectures. But they do not share their funding. And they're bringing in some of the, like the dream team of anti-Zionist
Mhm.
scholars, the Peter Beinarts and others. So
Mhm.
they clearly have money, but they don't share where their money is from, right? So I don't
Mhm.
know where a lot of the professors get their money. We do know about this Arab source, and work is being done to figure out what's funding this.
Um, right. So there are so many thank yous. I'm 20, many thank yous. I think we really understand that we're in trouble right now.
It's
And
an existential moment, and
yep.
I really believe all hands on deck. Was just saying recently to someone, um, I wouldn't mind like retiring in the next 6 or 7 years or something like that, and I wouldn't mind sort of cruising into retirement. You know what old professors do? Those last 5 or 6, 7 years, they start coasting, whatever. That sounds pretty good to me. I'm pretty tired after decades of doing this, but Happily, I guess, I'm hearing the call. It's an existential moment. I'm going to spend the next 5, 6, 7 years bringing this institute into existence, creating and mobilizing scholars. Amongst the important tasks for it is the following. Because these folks are literally 20 years ahead of us. Right now, the graduate school pipelines are empty of Zionists, right? It is a kiss of death to your career if you are a Zionist in graduate school. It's just like you have no chance, right? And so there might be a few hidden Zionists, but they have to stay down low. They have to keep it secret. Basically, the pipelines are empty, which means not only does this ideology dominate the academy currently, but they're in pretty good position to dominate it for the next generation as well. So one of the things I aim to do as I get up and running, I hope to ultimately be able to provide graduate degrees, right? And we need to support and produce scholars who can be critical of this material, critical of anti-Zionism, as opposed to simply, going along with the majority opinion here. So we have our work cut out for us. It's going to be a generation-long battle, but it starts today, right? The longest journey starts with a single step. So this is the first step of what will be a long journey, and I'm happily energized by it. I decided I don't want to coast into my retirement. I want to go full steam ahead like
Mhm.
this. And I take a lot of inspiration from Herzl. Not that I compare myself to him, but he got that crazy idea in his head for a Jewish state, and then he just didn't stop until he
Mhm.
died. I hope that doesn't happen to me, but he didn't stop until he could bring it into being. And so I've got a picture of him up
Right.
in my study to remind myself that's what it's going to take. But it
But Chaim
can't do it
Weizmann.
alone. As he said, it's only if the Jews want it will this happen. He can't will it into existence. The Jews have to will it. So I'm hoping with these other organizations I just mentioned in the Institute, we're going to start mobilizing and motivating and creating proud Zionists who are equipped to be critical of the anti-Zionist ideology.
Um, so there's a number of questions about, that there's a number of these groups. The Indiana University has an Institute for the Study of Contemporary Anti-Semitism.
Wonderful.
And
Right.
right, so this Jerry Salem is saying, are we at a point where maybe there needs to be some more centralized efforts and,
Wonderful. Fantastic question. Let me say two things on that. And I think since I ran out of time at the end, I didn't quite get the chance to make this point. I think what's important about the three groups that I've mentioned tonight, the two activist groups in the Scholarly Institute, it is time that the community change its focus. There's some wonderful centers studying anti-Semitism, such as Indiana. I have highest respect for the scholars there and the work that they do, and several other centers as well. But the battle over anti-Semitism, rightly or wrongly, we've lost it. We've failed, right? That ship has sailed. We've been arguing for 2 decades that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. We have to fight anti-Semitism. And we've lost. That didn't stop the incredible tide of Jew hate, which has overtaken the academy. So, partly for that empirical reason alone, our focus is shifting. The shift is now we're going to focus on anti-Zionism, not anti-Semitism. We all know anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, closely related, but the folks on the other side who dominate the academy have managed to distinguish the two. So what we need to show, for example, is that anti-Zionism, although of course it is the most recent manifestation of Jew hate, make no mistake about that, nevertheless, it should be and can be studied and opposed in its own right. It should no longer be acceptable to say, I'm not an anti-Semite, I'm an anti-Zionist. I'm an anti-Zionist should come to sound as unacceptable as I'm an anti-Semite, right? And so the focus is to move to anti-Zionism. Whether the anti-Semitism centers that have done such wonderful work can or will do that remains a little bit to be seen. Perhaps my institute can be housed in one of them, and so that could be focusing on the anti-Zionism there. So it's important to stress that. As far as the centralized thing, I'm all with you. It is both a strength and a weakness that Jews are divisive amongst themselves, and et cetera. I could talk at length about that, but we do need some sort of central. People need to know where to go when there's an incident they're dealing with, for example, right?
Uh,
And we have
yeah.
a lot of different organizations which overlap
Mhm.
and compete for turf and resources, which is not good. I think there's some good things about having kind of an expanded ecosystem of different
Mhm.
organizations with some overlap. But right now it's a little bit confused. So we're trying to figure out how to create something a little more centralized without turning into the elders of Zion, right? We're not, because we're not that. We don't want to create like the elders who pull all the strings, but we do need to centralize our efforts to be more efficient.
Right. Okay. Well, there was this comment that we're 16 million people or so against billions and billions of
We
others. So
are.
we have our work cut out for us. Here's just we're going to wrap up now. It's 8 o'clock, but I just wanted to get this last comment in by Cantor Neil Schwartz. It sends chills up my spine. He said, "This first Hanukkah, this is the first Hanukkah when I have been too fearful to put my electric Hanukkah in my window. We have had some low-level attacks here in the Deep South already." That just sent chills up my spine, really.
And
Yeah.
it is no, it is the way, we
Mm,
did not put an I stand with Israel sign in our window because we're afraid. And I so admire some people around the neighborhood who do. We have
mm,
kids, like it's
mm. Of
risky. And and with just the recent violence, just Australia and the
course,
Brown
you're
University thing
right.
is unclear what's happened there, but it might have a Jewish angle. And there's actually, unfortunately, an MIT professor was murdered last night that might have a Jewish angle. It's not known yet,
Mhm.
but these are scary, scary times, and I feel for that person, and we need to reclaim the turf where you can proudly be a Zionist on a campus. And I focus on the campus because I think it's so central. It starts on the campus and then it sort of spreads outward into the infosphere and society. So I'm focusing on the campus, but that is the goal, to get to the point where a college can have a debate about Zionism and anti-Zionism and nobody feels afraid and nobody is silenced. That will be the day I know we have a victory, right? But right now it's not that. The Jews are cowering, and the sign of that is, without even officially launching or formally recruiting, I already have a list of over 70 scholars who've expressed interest, most of whom they're coming out of the woodwork. They've been silent and they're cowering because it's really scary to be like the only Zionist on your campus, right? It's literally physically threatening. So the goal is there's strength in numbers and hopefully courage in numbers. So that's what I
Okay.
aim to do.
All right. So we're going to look forward to the course that's coming up and mark your calendars for those dates, and we'll put them in the email that goes out to you following this lecture. And for those who've asked, the lectures are always on our website. They will be in a little bit, a couple of days. And then those who register for this lecture will also get a copy, will also get a link to the lecture. So we're going to change gears just for a little bit because we're very always focused on European and Ashkenazic, the diaspora in the Ashkenazic world, and the history of anti-Zionism, anti-Semitism in the Ashkenazic world. But our next lecture is going to feature Menashe Karamov, founder of and CEO of SAMI, the Sephardic American Mizrahi Initiative. He's going to lecture from Bakura to Jerusalem, Part 1, Memory, Migration, and Identity, on Tuesday, December 30th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time. So we hope to see you there for this lecture. So learn a little bit more about the Mizrahi experience, the Sephardic experience, and the anti-Semitism that they experienced and their history. So it behooves us to really embrace the Mizrahi experience as well as this Ashkenazic anti-Semitism that we know so well. Okay, so that is on December 30th at 12 p.m. So thank you all. We run a few minutes over, but still very much worth it. And thank you again, Dr. Pessin, for all you do. And we are so going to be with you for your next endeavor. And
Thank you for that support. I appreciate it. Yep.
okay, good night, everyone.